Don't you know that she's just my style, and she drives me wild. Hello, Gary Lewis and the Playboys fans. It's been a few months, but now we're back with episode 4, the 4th studio album from Gary Lewis and the Playboys from early 1966, a little record called She's Just My Style, and She Drives Me Wild. Now I know it's been a while since we've covered Gary Lewis. You might remember a few months ago we talked about their 3rd studio album, Everybody Loves a Clown, So Why Don't You? And although I got some really nice comments on there, that video didn't garner too many views and didn't really seem to draw much interest. So I thought, well, I'll take a break from Gary for a while. We have horror movies for October and so on to look at. But now, November, we're back in music world. We have some Beach Boys stuff coming up. Time to take a look at the next album in this series. She's Just My Style. It was indeed also released to other formats, notably the 2-for CD, where it's paired with the aforementioned Everybody Loves a Clown. So, to recap real quick, if you were one of the many people who didn't watch the Everybody Loves a Clown video, we know that that song, the title song I should say, reached number 4 on the charts, which was low for Gary Lewis and the Playboys, but certainly pretty good across the board. It was also somewhat of a concept album, had a lot of kind of carnival-ish songs, things like Time Stands Still, Let Me Tell Your Fortune, songs like that. And then they were back again with their next single in late 1965, a single that ended up going all the way to number 3. I believe it was the group's last top 5 single as well. She's Just My Style, which they decided they would use as the title for the next album. Alright, so a few stylistic changes I think to talk about. First, Snuff Garrett, or Thomas Garrett as his real name was generally the producer for Gary Lewis and the Playboys' work at Liberty Records. And a man named Leon Russell usually did the arrangements, but this time we see quite a change up. You might notice 3 of the songs are marked with asterisks. And again, I don't know if you'll be able to see the credits very well at the bottom there, but for the first time we have figures besides those 2 handling producing and arranging duties. Only 3 of the songs, in case you couldn't see it, was She's Just My Style, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, and I Won't Make That Mistake Again, are done with the usual crew, Garrett and Russell. Everything else, according to the credits at the bottom, says producer Gary Lewis and Dave Pell, arranger Harry Betts. So Gary Lewis getting more involved. We saw that with some of the previous LPs. He was getting more and more in terms of writing credits and arranging work, that kind of thing. But now handling co-production duties in this case and moving away from the people who had helped build them up since the very beginning with this diamond ring. So we already have a stylistic change going on. We also have Playboys on the cover. Not all the same Playboys. No Playboys in the back. You might remember for the last record, Everybody Loves a Clown, there were no Playboys to be seen anywhere on the sleeve because people kept coming in and then leaving again and so on. Some of the Playboys, like Tommy Triplehorn, Carl Radel, they're well known. Others were just kind of session or session-ish musicians who kind of came and went. But again, another personnel shake-up. At least we get Playboys this time, along with Gary, of course, there in the center. We also have the group trying to kind of rebrand itself, and this is reflected in the liner notes on the back. Every record so far in their discography has taken a different approach towards how the liner notes were written. You know, they were completely different in each album. In this case, we have a shorter blurb and one that's talking about how Gary Lewis and the Playboys do a lot of cross-genre music and how they reinvent the songs of other artists in their own unique and distinctive style. Kind of positing this record as a concept album based around wildly reimagining other people's work. The album doesn't really commit to that, as we'll see going through track by track, but at least it's an idea, and one that they kind of fleshed out. They didn't really commit to it. But I get an interesting bit too, trying to kind of age up their music and make it more contemporary, those sorts of things. And I like that approach, no doubt figuring that groups have been popular in the early 60s were kind of losing traction by the mid-60s. Alright, so this album was not particularly successful commercially, only peaking at number 71, despite having a major single, a top 5 single, as the lead-off. Again, this was released in early 1966. So, despite personnel change-ups, despite kind of a maybe soft rebrand, let's dig in and see what Gary Lewis and the Playboys did differently for this new record, She's Just My Style. So, leading off, we have the title song, released originally in late 1965, reaching its chart peak around this record's release in early 1966. She's Just My Style, one of my 2 favorite Gary Lewis and the Playboys songs. We'll get to the other one a little bit later. This one, of course, was intended as something of an homage to the Beach Boys. The vocal and instrumental arrangements certainly reflect that. I do wish the Beach Boys had done a version of this. A couple fans claim that they had. I've never been able to, like in a live set I should say, I've never been able to find anything to back that up. But I think the Beach Boys could absolutely rock this song. But anyway, Gary Lewis and the Playboys do a fantastic job on it. If you haven't heard it yet, please do go out and listen to it. I think you'll like it a lot. One of their most popular tunes, I have to say. There's nothing I can say about it that hasn't been said already. Now, we know from their previous records, the group loves covers, sometimes copying them, sometimes reimagining them, sometimes something in the middle. In this case, we're on to our covers now for a little bit. First up, we have, by the Knickerbockers, Lies, Lies. Now, the Knickerbockers were an American group, but they were trying to get a Beatles sound into their song. They even sound a little bit like John Lennon and Paul McCartney to an extent. And it was a successful song for them. Gary's version is pretty close, you know, definitely a copycat, especially on the instruments. But he doesn't try for the Beatles-ish vocals so much. A lot of people think Lies is a Beatles song. Even though it's done by Americans, it sounds so much like them. Very easy to make that mistake. Gary Lewis's version you wouldn't mistake for the Beatles. It follows it pretty closely, just Gary has a different vocal style, not as powerful as the Knickerbockers' original. Then we go back in time to the 50s. All I Have to Do is Dream, 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 Dream. Another Everly Brothers version. We've seen them do Walk Right Back and Till I Kissed You, that kind of stuff. So Dream is here. No doubt this was a song they thought they could reimagine in a 1960s style. And indeed, it's much more of a pop arrangement than the original. But I don't think Gary's voice suits this song very well. He does it much more upbeat, but it loses that gentle, kind of ethereal, dreamlike quality that the Everly Brothers original had. And I think it's one of his weaker Everly Brothers covers there. Of course, a lot of rock groups at the time took influence from the Everlys, but then kind of put that in their own style. The Playboys like to cover the Everly Brothers, but here, their version of Dream doesn't quite land. And then we go to something that was much more contemporary. From the Beatles' Help, here's the movie Blu-ray. Hey, you've got to hide your love away. You know, the Beach Boys, of course, had done it in late 1965. So now Gary Lewis and the Playboys, they get a chance to try it out. And they do follow it pretty closely. In the liner notes for the CD, Gary Lewis notes how he really wanted to do Beatles songs, and he's more of a Beatles fan, you know, after his retirement from music than he ever was back in the 1960s. And he didn't think that Snuff Garrett and some of the other people who were handling the production duties and stuff would want the Playboys to cover Beatles songs, but he really wanted to do that. So maybe that explains some of those personnel shifts, some of that kind of breaking away from the status quo there. They don't do a bad job on it. It has a little bit of a longer intro, and the tambourine is much heavier in Gary Lewis's version. Again, it's kind of a lighter cover, though. It doesn't really commit to Lennon's really soulful, kind of pained delivery. It's kind of just like a standard pop kind of arrangement, but it's done in such a way that Gary's voice does sound pretty good on it. And then we have an original. I Won't Make That Mistake Again. Mistake Again. The B-side to the She's Just My Style single called I Won't Make That Mistake Again. A really fun tune. If you remember, the liner notes for the Liberty Singles collection state that Liberty's view on B-sides was they were originals, they were just cheapo, quickie songs, and they didn't get any of the promotion or radio airplay, or at least nothing compared to what the A-side got. But I won't make that mistake again. It's actually a really fun song, and it pops up on a lot of Gary Lewis and the Playboys hits packages because it's an original, and it's buoyant, and it's very enjoyable. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad that we have another original, in this case a complete single, so if you didn't collect 45s, you would still have it. Nice addition. And then wrapping up the first side, he took 100 pounds of clay, and he said, "Hey, listen." Gene McDaniels had done the song 100 Pounds of Clay, sometimes in writing called a 100 Pounds of Clay. I don't know why that is, but anyway, they'd done Gene McDaniels songs before, like Chip Chip, where they even copied his weird, over-enunciated vocals. "You cheat a little bit," all that stuff. But here they're doing Gene McDaniels again. His song, 100 Pounds of Clay, was the creation story redone as like a pop ballad. And his version, along with the covers by artists like Arthur Alexander and Craig Douglas, all had, fake kind of gospel ethereal sounds to open the song. And it had a certain, depth to it despite being a pop tune, kind of a almost precursor to something like modern Christian pop in a way. Gary Lewis and the Playboys eliminate almost all of that kind of pomp and pretentiousness and things like that, and just do it as sort of a standard 60s pop tune that kids would like. And I actually really like that, and it's an instance of this album committing to that idea that we're going to restyle these older songs and do them our way and make them original. And I like it a lot. It's probably my favorite version of the song. It's very simple, it's very direct, there's no kind of fake awe to it all. I guess because it's the creation story told in, a rock song, doesn't mean it has to be all fancy and highfalutin. Their version isn't, and I think it's a fitting close to the first side. You flip the record over, we'll start to see a bit of a pattern here. The next thing up, we go back to the Beatles, this time to get a little bit of Rubber Soul. Little song called "You Better Run for Your Life If You Can, Little Girl. Hide your head in the sand, little girl." So Gary apparently really liked "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away," and also the Beatles' "Run for Your Life." "Run for Your Life" is not a favorite amongst many Beatles fans, mostly due to its very uncomfortable lyrics, about killing your girlfriend if she ever tries to cheat on you, that kind of thing. And Nancy Sinatra did an amazing gender-swapped version around the same time too that's really gritty and harsh. It's like, wow, that's a good cover. Gary Lewis and the Playboys take this kind of dark, off-kilter Beatles song and do it in the friendliest, happiest way. "You better run for your life if you can, little girl." That kind of thing. It's like, oh, there's a sort of a fun, dark humor vibe to that, but I don't think it quite lands. They do borrow a lot from the Beatles' arrangement, but it's kind of a less weird one, I guess you'd say. It's more conventional in some ways, and Gary's kind of normal vocal. I wrote on my notes here, it's a Beatles light cover, that kind of thing. It's based on it, it borrows a lot from it, but it doesn't live up to it. And it's an odd song to pick. Apparently Gary Lewis really liked it. I don't know, I don't think it quite fits here. It's one that I tend to maybe not skip, but listen to less than others on this record. And we've got another fun classic here. "Take good care of my baby. Please don't ever make her cry." Going back to the 50s there, and Bobby V, or maybe early 1960s. A lot of people have covered "Take Good Care of My Baby." The Beatles did, Dion DeMucci did. A lot of artists there. This is a good one, I think, for Gary Lewis to do. His voice really suits the song. He and Bobby V, I think, sound similar enough, and it's kind of a little more upbeat, a little poppier to represent the mid-60s. It's a fun version now. I think I was kind of disappointed in "Run for Your Life," but their version of "Take Good Care of My Baby" I thought was a nice addition. Then we have one of my favorite songs. Some of my friends watching are going to roll their eyes when they hear this. Next we go, "Down in the Boondocks, doo-doo-doo-doo, down in the Boondocks." So Billy Joe Royal's big breakthrough, "Down in the Boondocks." Gets a Gary Lewis version here. Gary's version, of course, is kind of more pop than country, and his vocals aren't as good as Billy Joe Royal's are. It doesn't have that grit and that twang that it kind of needs to have. It's a nice kind of standard pop version, but they don't do much with the song. And despite being one of my favorite songs, and always a good listen, I can't say I'm real keen on his cover. Then we have one that definitely feels more like it would work with kind of a simple pop arrangement. You didn't have to be so nice, from the Lovin' Spoonful. This one actually gets something of a little write-up in here about how Gary's version uses a lot more percussion, more bells, things like that, than the original by the Lovin' Spoonful. Frankly, in my listenings and comparisons, I didn't notice anything that was way, way more. Maybe a little bit, but nothing of substance. That wasn't what I took away from it anyway. Gary's is a little bit faster and more upbeat. It doesn't have the soulfulness that the Lovin' Spoonfuls does. It's not as tender, but it works as kind of like a standard pop version. I could see kids who didn't want to listen to a love song liking this version a little more than the Spoonfuls, but the Spoonfuls is more of a romantic tune, as I punch my CD case there. Alright, then we have one that I think is an original. A little song called Someone I Used to Know. Changing the lock on your heart, that kind of thing. I think this is an original. On previous records we listened to songs like The Best Man Wins, and ones that I couldn't find any other artists covering, either around the same time or before Gary Lewis and the Playboys did. Some of them had like demo records, like Let Me Tell Your Fortune. It seems like Liberty maybe had songs that were just kind of laying around that nobody was using. They might have been written for one particular artist who didn't want it. Something along those lines. I think this is an instance here with Someone I Used to Know, which is kind of a fun tune. It's very poppy. I could see it being a good B-side to a record there. Written by the team of Levitt and Pockris there, both of whom were accomplished songwriters. So this must have been something written for another artist that was just laying around, so they gave it to Gary. A good song about moving on, I think, after a relationship that's failed. Has kind of a melancholy vibe, but it's also upbeat. I think an underrated part of this record. In our big closing, we're going back to the Yardbirds, Heart Full of Soul. And of course, the Playboys had done some Yardbirds songs before. The Yardbirds original is noted for having a lot of weird, like, distorted instruments. You know, there was a guitar, but it's supposed to sound like a sitar. There's a lot of fuzz, things like that. And Gary Lewis and the Playboys copy some of those elements. They don't go full in like the Yardbirds did. They definitely want it to be a little more conventional, too. But I said with Run For Your Life, it was Beatles light. This is Yardbirds light, that kind of thing. It's trying to do the same, but it doesn't really commit to all the intricate parts, I guess I should say, of the original song. And it's kind of lighter and weaker, I think. And that wraps up She's Just My Style. So although it was kind of marketed as a concept album, it really isn't. You can see a lot of those covers are pretty close copies. You know, very few of them make any major differences to the original song. But it's a fun song list, and the strength of the title song and its B-side, and a couple of these covers, certainly make it worth listening to and worth owning in your collection. Again, thankfully one that was released on CD. Pretty solid record, I'd say. Is it one of my favorites of their albums? It's moving up the list, I think, but still not an absolute favorite. We'll get to some I like better a little bit down the road. So, what are your thoughts on Gary Lewis and She's Just My Style? Please comment those below. Next time we talk about Gary, it'll be for Hits Again. And of course, the first Gary Lewis and the Playboys Hits package will be coming up soon as well. But next week we'll be back to the Beach Boys for Beach Boys in Concert. Hope to see you then. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment. Have a good one. Go out there and see if she's just your style. Thank you.